And welcome back to Washington Commanders Insider. Today we're talking about day number 6 of training camp for the Washington Commanders. We're also going to be talking about their most recent roster move as Nate Herbig retires. And so before we go ahead and we jump into it, I first want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, just like Jaden Daniels is going to be hitting Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Zach Ertz, and many others for multiple touchdowns this upcoming season. And so in exchange for hitting that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Washington Commanders. And so make sure that you hit that like, you hit that subscribe, and you join the Washington Commanders Insider family as we talk nothing but Washington Commanders football. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and let's jump into it as we're talking about day 6 of training camp with the Washington Commanders. We'll be talking about a lot of everything. And so always love to start off with Coach Dan Quinn. This is what he had to say to the press before practice. And so we'll be paraphrasing everything, whether it's Dan Quinn or some of the players that we're getting ready to talk about here. And so let's start with Dan Quinn and starting with the focus point here of today's practice. And so he was talking about finishing up this 3-day pack with working on sub packages. And so getting players in and out there on those sub situations. And then also too, wanting to do some down and distance work. And he was talking about the ball will be moving throughout periods. And so wanted to move the ball throughout the periods here. And so that was the focus coming into today's practice. Next, he's asked about Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt. And so the reporter, I believe, said Bill, which Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt, I believe that is his nickname, which is Bill. And I guess he makes a terrific move in practice yesterday. And so I guess a sequence of moves, and he gets into the open field after finding a narrow gap in the offensive line. And then he's met there by Tyler Owens. And so Dan Quinn talked about iron sharpening iron at that point in time. But he said that, look, both players really made the plays that he wanted to see. And he said that was something that they showed on film there. And so, again, Ja'Cory Crosskey-Merritt gets a mention. Tyler Owens has definitely been getting some buzz. And so we'll be talking about him in a couple of other shows. But he goes on to say that, with Tyler Owens, blitzing, middle of the field stuff, he said so far he's had a very good first block. And so that's what he said there about Tyler Owens. And so next, talking about Mikey Sainristil here. And so he was talking about him leading Trey Amos and just really how he's been a great resource for Trey Amos and how he's developing into a leader. And I'm talking about Mikey Sainristil. And so we'll be talking about what he had to say. But it certainly seems like that Mikey Sainristil is becoming a leader within this locker room. And so the next thing that he talks about here is just what they're looking to do as far as the install. And so I believe he mentions Coach Joe Witt Jr. there. And he says that they're halfway there with the install. And so they still have some more to do. And this was kind of a question geared towards players and just putting them into certain spots, I believe. And so finding the right time and place to put players into the spots, but still wanted to emphasize that they're still doing the install. And so once they come out of that, then that's kind of where you'll start to figure out, okay, what you want to do with your personnel. And so again, just paraphrasing that. Next key point here, off tomorrow. And so the Commanders will be off tomorrow. The next going into some of the players that have stood out here. And so he talked about Luke McCaffrey, and he also talks about Ben Sinnott. And so he says with Luke McCaffrey, one of the key points here is that he's thinking like a wide receiver. And so remember, he was a quarterback in college, but we've been hearing this, that now, he's making these type of adjustments that need to be made as a wide receiver. And so this is definitely boding well for Luke McCaffrey. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, if he can carve out a really good role for himself this year. And so next, talking about Ben Sinnott too as well, and Luke McCaffrey really, and talking about their knowledge and understanding of the offense and being able to make adjustments. In fact, he makes an example of Ben Sinnott. I guess he made a terrific adjustment with Jaden Daniels, I believe in yesterday's practice there. And so, both of those players really getting comfortable with the offense. It seems like that the game is slowed down, and, that's what you want to see in year two. And so next, he's asked about Eddie Goldman. And so he said that, a lot kind of went into that decision, especially with the play that he had last year. And so that ultimately led into the decision to bring him in. But he really raved about him being able to be strong and squaring up there and just add to the defense on early downs. And so I think that that's going to be huge for the Commanders, especially when it comes down to stopping the run, which I think that that's going to be really the biggest challenge for the Commanders. And so next, talking about the defensive line, he kind of goes into that and saying that it's really trying to find a good balance, but loves the fact that he just has a crew of different skill sets. And I think that that's what it comes down to when you're looking to get versatile. You want, guys that can really attack in different ways. And so I think it's going to be fun to see, how this ultimately shapes out here in year two for Joe Witt Jr. in this defense. And so next thing that he's talking about here is just that when you're coaching, that you take coach and you put teacher in that place. And so talking about just, why he loves to coach. And he also mentioned Steve Mariucci as well as somebody that has inspired him in his coaching journey. And so good to see those insights here, from Dan Quinn going into practice. And so that's, again, what he had to say going into day 6. And so next, I wanted to talk about what Mikey Sainristil had to say. And I think that the key thing to take out of everything that he says is just really leadership. I think that when you listen to Mikey Sainristil and then you hear Coach Dan Quinn talk about him, it just sounds like that he's stepping more into a leadership role. And it's hard to believe that this is only his second year in the NFL. I mean, he just sounds like he's been in the NFL for like 4 or 5 seasons. And so very impressed with what I heard from Mikey Sainristil. He was talking about just loving to get back to work here and just loving to do, obviously what he gets a chance to do, which is play in the National Football League. But I love one of the insights that he says here where he's talking about he wants to continue to work on the things that he's good at. And he talks about that, a lot of times you get geared in and locked in to trying to work on the things that you're not good at, that you kind of, forget the things that you are good at. And so I thought that that was some pretty good insight there, because you always want to really stay locked in on the basics and your bread and butter. And then obviously you do want to work on the things that you need to get better at. But I love that insight that we got from him, and just watching film and just the details. I think that that's kind of what you get out of that. And then next, I love when he's talking about his preparation. He's like, look, I want to make sure that everything's second nature by the time I get out there on Sundays. And so that reminds me of some of the things that I've heard from some of the greats out there, especially like Michael Jordan, where he would always say that he wanted practices to be way more harder than games. And so when you get out there to the games, it's really nothing. And so that's kind of what I got out of that from Mikey Sainristil. Next, he was talking about, how now second year in this system, the comfort in this system, and kind of knowing everyone, and also too, everybody just knowing where they need to be. I think that indicates that this defense could be really on the track to be better than they were a season ago. Next, with Debo, he's talking about the competition level and getting better, and these guys making each other better. And I guess he was talking about how they do some extra reps after practice. And so good to hear that from Mikey Sainristil. And then talking about just Trey Amos, and talking about how, he recognizes that he has the ability to be great, and that as a leader, he's going to hold him to the standards, and he's expecting everybody else to hold him to his standards as well. And so, it just kind of ties into really what we continue to hear about the Commanders and around this team, just the standards and everything that it takes to play here for the Washington Commanders. And so I thought that this was some great insights here, because he was like, look, I'm not going to let him fall short of the standards, and I would expect for him to do the same, but does rave about Trey Amos here. And so good sign that you have a guy that was out there year one, and he's raving about a guy that's coming into year one here with the Commanders, and really could play a major role like Mikey Sainristil did in year one for the Commanders. And so next, wanted to talk about Noah Brown here. And so Noah Brown, confidence. I mean, I think that that's what you get out of what he had to say. And so it sounds like that he definitely avoided a major injury, which was good to hear. And then also to see, we've been talking about clips here and there where he's been out there practicing. Remember going back to something that Dan Quinn said a couple days ago, that they're going to slowly ramp him up. And so he got a chance to get out there today. And so there was no pads, by the way. Next, he was talking about the wide receiver room and talking about how everybody in there is hungry and how everybody has chemistry and everybody wants to get to work. And so just kind of going into what he said there is just that everybody's hungry. And I think that that is across the board, really, I think for this football team. But those were the key takeaways there. He also did get honored by his little league team as well. And so he was excited about that, the fact that he could go back and kind of pour back into, a community that poured into him to get here. And so that was cool to see as well. And so next, I wanted to go ahead and look at the standouts from today. And so once again, if you go over to Commander's Wire here, this is where you can see a lot of the images and the videos. From the practices as well. So I'd like to continue to highlight that. And so first, I want to go ahead and jump into really the first key takeaway out of today. And it was like a wide receiver type of drill. It's like a wide receiver tight end / drill here. And so with that drill, you had the wide receivers that it looked like that they were curling underneath. And then you have the tight ends, I think, kind of running the boundary here. And so there was a nice play from Ben Sinnott. He looked very smooth out there. And so I also saw another clip with Ben Sinnott and just kind of coming out of his position and then going by Coach Cliff Kingsbury and then kind of going towards the pylon and then getting hit with a nice pass there. And so looking super confident here in year 2. So just kind of going back to what Dan Quinn said, but he was in a couple of highlights here. And so definitely wanted to put that out there. And so next thing, Jaden Daniels. And so I thought that Jaden Daniels, in the limited clip that I saw with him, it was just basic passing work where, you have a wide receiver running a route, across their face or whatever the case may be. And you just casually, dump it in there. And so with Jaden Daniels, he just looks comfortable. He looks confident. And just kind of going back to what Zach Ertz was saying about him a couple days ago, you could just tell that he's very poised and that he knows that this is his ship. But you can also see that he is very serious out there. And so it's that attention to detail that we love about Jaden Daniels, especially it's great just to have a franchise quarterback. And so anyway, he looked good out there, looked sharp in what he was doing. Next thing here, one of the other takeaways that I saw out of this was Deebo Samuel and the wide receivers were doing some back shoulder work today. And so that was good to see. I guess it was kind of like you had, a wide receiver kind of trailing. Next thing you know, you take a couple steps, you turn around, you look for the football. So thinking about that when you're running some of those end zone fades, or if you are running one of those go routes and that you do have to get to that back shoulder, great drill to have in your back pocket there. And so Deebo Samuel looking pretty good snagging the football here. And that's obviously including Luke McCaffrey out there. And so next, wanted to talk about Jordan McGee. And so I did get a chance to see a clip of him and Jordan McGee, man, his agility, he looks great out there. I think that for him, it's just staying healthy because going back to just the mandatory minicamp and Joe Wood Jr. saying that they had a package for him out there, and I believe to be in the 3 linebacker sets and things like that. And man, I'm looking forward to seeing what he's going to do this year because he looked awfully good out there. They were showing a drill where I guess he has to make an adjustment. And so it's like a call where they have to go to an audible and then he goes back into dropping into coverage. And so he looked very good with what he was doing there. He looked terrific as far as the confidence is concerned and everything else. And so just looking forward to seeing him progress, hopefully get past these injuries and be an impact on Sundays here. But he looked awfully good in that the drill that I saw here. And then next, just kind of going into some other stuff here. And so Terry McLaurin was out there signing autographs. You had Doug William, the great, out there. He was signing some autographs as well. And so that was cool to see. And so those are just a couple of other things that I saw there. Once again, if you head over to Commander's Wire, you can see some of these clips and images. And so all right, and going over to commanders.com, I think one of the key things that I saw out of that is that it mentions that Chris Moore actually, again, continues to be a standout here. And so looks like that he made several impressive catches and also, too, had a contested grab on 11 or in 11 on 11 drills as well. And so that is something that I saw here on commanders.com if you want to go read about that with some of the practice notes and things like that. And also, too, one last thing that was over there is that Jalen Lane, I guess he took the first reps for the punt returner. So we've been talking about this with Jalen Lane, and the fact that he's probably going to be an impact player on special teams, but says that he was out there as the first person taking snaps in the return role there. So definitely go check that out if you want to read about that. And so lastly, I wanted to go ahead and jump into just the latest roster move. And it looks like that Nate Herbig retires from the Washington Commanders. And so Dan Quinn did lead off the press conference with this. And this is something that you can also read about as well. And so, with him, it's interesting because very excited to see him come to the roster because he had so much experience. This is a guy that he played for the Eagles. He played for the Jets. He played for the Steelers in 2023. Looks like that a torn rotator cuff kept him out of last season. But here's a guy that 61 career games. He also had 30 starts here. And so, I just think that the biggest thing out of that is that you lose the experience. And Dan Quinn was just talking about how great of a teammate he was early on too as well. And so definitely sounds like that he's going to be missed in the building. And I just think that for the offensive line, what that means now is it just opens up some opportunities for some players because you have a guy like Julian Good-Jones out of Iowa State, his second year. So can he pave a way right now and find his way out there? And then also, too, you got some other guys that we're definitely taking a look at. I know he plays offensive tackle, but Timothy McKay, I still think that there's still going to be, I think, a good battle out here with guys kind of just trying to get into position and everything else like that. But make no mistake about it, I think that that experience is something that you love to have around, our younger players, Josh Connolly Jr., and then also to Brandon Coleman and guys like that. And so, it's going to be a little bit of a loss, but I still think that this Commanders group, they still have plenty of good depth up front, and I think it is going to be one of the more interesting battles here as camp moves on because remember, Coach Dan Quinn continues to talk about how much more the game changes once you put the pads on, and so these guys are going to be battling it out. So let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking here about Nate Herbig and retiring. Let me know here what you guys are thinking about what Dan Quinn had to say early on because he did mention Luke McCaffrey and the fact that he's thinking like a wide receiver. It seems to be a lot more comfortable here in year two, along with Ben Sinnott. Let me know what you guys are thinking about Noah Brown and him talking about being healthy here. Certainly sounds confident. Sounds like Mikey Sainristil is stepping up into a leadership role. And then lastly, with Jordan McGee, man, it looks like that if he can stay healthy, he's definitely primed for a big-time role for the Washington Commanders on defense. And so very excited about this. And so again, they are off tomorrow, but we will be talking more about the Washington Commanders anyway. So you guys let me know in the comments what you're thinking. And as we always say, look, go Commanders, and I will see you guys on the next one. All right, peace.